just drove by the bees and there's nothing going on. There's no activity at all. Pretty sure I already know what it is. So let me jump out and I'll show you. So I have sad news today. Pulled up to the beautiful spot back here to check on some things. And since we've been away from this spot for a while, trying to figure out our relocation effort, I haven't been able to check on the bees. So look what I found. There's no bees. I went ahead and opened it up. I'm going to run you through the errors that we did that caused what you're seeing here now. And hopefully you won't make the same mistake. I think we got a little overzealous in our approach of wild hives being transferred into these, and it was a really beautiful process. But what we did was a simple mistake that caused the loss of the entire colony. So let me walk you through that. Okay, so all the comb on the inside has fallen over. Everything in there is laying down, and hive beetles have made their way in. Since all the comb is touching and laying and overlapped one with another, there's nowhere for the bees to get in and get between the comb and remove that larva. And since we created this environment where the comb could fall, it did. What happened was, when it got warm outside, the comb that was not held by wires or any wax foundation, because this is wild comb, right? We took this from an abandoned home, and we transferred the comb into the lay-ins frames, and then we wrapped a couple rubber bands around to hold it in place, and then we set it in the hive here straight up and down so the bees can then remold it onto the frame. Problem is, by doing it that way, what we did is we snipped the wires in the wire frame. And since we snipped it, because we couldn't really press the comb into the wire, and we didn't have anything to heat the wire up and melt it in, we were just like, well, let's go ahead and snip it, and then we'll use the rubber bands, and then maybe the bees will mold it back in, and it'll be strong. But it wasn't. What ended up happening was they only patched a few edges of the comb back to the frame because it wasn't perfect dimensions. And then on top of that, it's been in the 90s over here. And so as soon as it warmed up, the wax started to melt and distort, and then started to fall down. And as it did that, it folded over. As soon as it folded over and you get comb touching, the beetles can get in there, and they lay their larvae in there, and there's no way for the bees to defend themselves. They can't get in between that and kill them all and get them out. So the population of the beetles and the larvae just grew and grew and grew, totally overwhelmed this colony. And I have been gone for several weeks. I had no idea this was going on. Could have solved it, could have stopped it, and I don't know that we can salvage anything out of this. Look at that, that's just gross. Hive beetles are disgusting. Disgusting creatures. Man. What a bummer. What a bummer. Yeah, you see, that's how it's fallen over, and it's only welded here. Ew, get off of me. There's some new comb, there's some nice fresh stuff, but user error here on my part, and they folded in the heat because there was no wire support. And that's the result. Solution: don't do that again. Brace your comb nice and strong. Keep the wires in the frame if you can. Maybe instead of using rubber bands, had we used metal wire to wrap around so the bees wouldn't eat it up and then remove it. I came by here a while back, and they were actually pulling the wire for the rubber bands out of the front of the hive. which I thought was really cool because they work as a team and move it out, all the impurities from the hive. But I don't know, maybe had we done that, we would have had more success. But the results that we're seeing here is completely our fault. This is not the bees not being able to handle the beetles. It's not the bees not being able to handle the heat or any other element. They were totally fine. They were thriving. They were doing great when I was here last time. And then the comb folded over, provided that hiding space for the beetles, and they can't kill it. And so you're setting them up to fail. And so since an enemy in their home had a space to hide, grow, and thrive, it grew to a population that overwhelmed the colony. So now we know not to do that again. And for those of you that are wondering exactly what I mean by remove the wires, that's what I mean. There's no wires in here. We wrapped the rubber band, one at the top and one at the bottom, and that was going to be sufficient, but it wasn't, obviously. And I've explained why. So I'm going to go ahead and clean this out just a little bit more to get the comb in the sun. I'll let the bees come clean it up, and hopefully some birds will kill all these maggots. The beautiful thing about beekeeping is that there are billions of bees in the world. So when you lose a colony, it's a lesson learned. Start over. We couldn't find the queen in the wild hive that was in that abandoned home, and so we were like, well, maybe it'll survive, maybe it won't. Let's see what happens. But just found this queen cell. Whether it's viable or not, I don't know, but it doesn't much matter now. Crazy what can happen in such a short period of time. It's just been a couple of weeks, and these insects have just gone crazy. So all I'm doing now is just cleaning out the hive. The birds and stuff can come and kill these maggots and get them exposed to the elements, so they'll die off and be no more a part of my life or that of my colony. Oh, just gross. So these are hive beetles right here. I'll give you a close-up. Generally speaking, a hive can take care of hive beetles, no problem. They attack them, they remove them. I'm pro-nature in almost every other aspect, but these are nasty, nasty bugs. Just gross. When you're using a Lands hive trap, it has wires in the frame. You're good. All you have to do is pull it out of there, move it over, and set it in. The comb doesn't fall over like it did in my hive here because frames are built with the wire, and the combs are built natively by those bees throughout the whole frame. So you get a nice solid frame. Propolis and wax and all that all along the edges, sealing everything off, you know, that bee glue, right? And when they kind of solder everything together, it's solid. You can pick that frame up and you can move it around and it's not going to fall over. But this stuff in here, it was really just held on by rubber bands. There's just a couple little weld points that the bees did and where it was touching the exterior of the frame, and that was all. And so when it got nice and warm in the 90s, it just molded right over. And so that's our fault. I did that. That's my fault. Guilty. Bees didn't do that. And the native bees did not succumb to the hive beetles. I gave them a space to thrive where they had no chance. This colony just up and left because there's no dead bees in there, not even a little bit. And so chances are when they realized what was going on, they left. Maybe they swarmed. I have no idea. But what had happened here was enough that it killed off any larva or brood that they may have had, and that's gone. And so crossing my fingers that we'll have a queen with this next one, and we'll be able to skip the problems by rewiring these frames and getting them all cleaned up nicely to be able to give the bees a very straight, perfected comb in those frames. Bees are very clean animals. They actually are, no, not animals, but they might as well be animals. They're crazy. They're very incredible species. What they do is, in nature, is very clean. It's very organized. It's mathematical. There's specific gaps and distances and shapes and sizes and all these things that they do to the comb to make it work and to keep pests out. And they have, even down to the point of putting their food storage way, way, way deep into the hive so that it's not by the entrance. And they do that for temperature regulation. They do that for pest prevention, to keep other robbers away from their food storage, like all these things. There's so many things. They're intelligent animals, incredibly intelligent species. But then we come around with our big old opposable thumbs and we do things our way and we screw it up. And then they die like this. So this is, to me, evidence, again, of no matter how much experience you get, no matter how many things you're doing, we're not built to make honey, they are. And so the closer we can do it their way, the more success they'll have. You know, I did this with a 20-year beekeeper who has done extractions before as well. And this was just something that we didn't anticipate. We didn't really think about that particular problem outside of the measurements that or the precautions that we took to prevent it. Beyond that, we thought we were good. And we were kind of trusting that the bees would re-weld that comb in, and that by the time the rubber bands were removed, it would be strong enough to do that. I didn't really count on the heat coming and molding it over with the few tack points that the bees had. So in retrospect, had we thought a little bit harder about it, we probably would have used wire instead of rubber bands so the bees couldn't remove it. It should be done in a way where the comb is as perfectly fitted to the frame as possible. Sometimes that's not possible because the wild comb is in a variety of different shapes and sizes depending on where you're pulling it out of. But these few minor adjustments would have made a big difference in the success of this colony. So I hope you learned something from this video. I hope that there's some takeaway for you. And then when you're doing your own extractions or your own wild hive catch or your own observations of your own bees, that you're taking note of these subtle changes that you can make to ensure that the bees have it their way. The closer to their way, the better. Stay tuned. We'll show you the extraction coming up. Peek in here. So here's the crawl space we're working with. And here's the bees. All over. So there's lots of bees. How many bees do you think is in here? 60 or 70,000 bees. That is a lot.
It's a very strong colony here, but it's been here for probably at least several years, at the very least.
Absolutely.